Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for another live episode of Teachers for Teachers. That's you, moms and dads. I'm Dr. Dijanna, and I'm here with Dr. Leah, and today we're going to engage in a really cool conversation. It's about playful learning, it's about having fun, and it's about games. I don't know about you, but my kids love games. And if there's any way that I can get my kids to be engaged in their learning, it's it. It's finding a game.
Right.
For
If we
sure.
can get them as engaged in their education as they are in the games, then we're really successful. And I think a lot of parents have been concerned over the fact that we went from restricting the number of hours kids could be on screen during the day to it's wide open. Their education is there, their social life is there, everything is on screen. So we thought we would go to the best expert on the planet when it comes to games, the inventor and co-founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese, and a really dear friend and mentor, Nolan Bushnell. Nolan, welcome. And I love the fact that you are sitting in the middle of your creative space.
Yes, it's a bit of a disaster, but my kids tell me that I could build a space shuttle with the parts I have here, so it's not all lost.
Very good point. So Nolan, what about just a very simple issue of screen time? What's your thinking about that?
I believe in the overall principle that too much of anything is not good. And that, and my dad's favorite phrase on that, and I've been pounding my kids with it, is moderation in all things, including moderation. That is, every once in a while you get off the reservation, but just be moderate. That if you're spending, you know, 10 hours a day playing Warcraft, that's clearly too much, even though I think Warcraft is a relatively good educational game.
What kinds of things do you think kids are learning in that? Because I hear it and I think, oh, they're learning how to go to war.
Well, one of the things that I love about it is the chemistry that you learn. Like if you want glass, you have to combine fire and sand and potash. And if you, and so you have to find fire and I think that that building and spatial reasoning is a really important skill set that you get. I mean, you can't take an IQ test without having a lot of spatial reasoning going on. That's Warcraft in spades. But at the same time, um, I mean, if you look at Bloom's taxonomy and you look at where you really want the kids, you want to get them up as high as you can. And so many of the games teach you nouns and verbs and, and definitions when you really want to create wisdom. And what is wisdom? It's kind of this combination of understanding and knowledge and synthesis that you can only get through a significant amount of learning and diverse learning in all kinds of ways. So that's a long and rambling answer, and I apologize for that. But
we asked you because you were going to talk.
Well,
I
Nolan, I agree. I have little kids, and they love Minecraft. And it's one of those games where they're learning all sorts of stuff. They're building their own world. They have to figure out chemistry, collect materials, figure out what materials are going to do the job that they want it to do. I tell you, my daughter.
allocation,
I know.
yeah.
Yeah. My daughter knows more about all the different materials in Minecraft. Like maybe that's 1,000 vocabulary words that she knows everything. So there is a lot of learning.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember my youngest son Wyatt. Leah knows Wyatt. He's a character, but he is a real history buff, and he learned it all from video games in the early days of all of a sudden I've got a blank spot on the game, but it was a Microsoft game about that went through the eons of epochs of people from the, you know, and at our dinner table, we basically said, okay, we're not going to talk about the steppe nomads tonight.
Well, you have a passionate group of young people, and I can't imagine when they were all kids and you were wrangling those conversations, because they are.
I have 8 children, so that's excessive too. So moderation would be great.
Moderation.
Wonderful. Why should we bring in the rest of our guests, because we have a couple of our panel people who might like to be involved in the conversation.
Absolutely. We want to welcome the following amazing people to the conversation. First up, I'd like to welcome Anne. Go ahead and say hi to everybody there right hand so they know which one you are. Anne McMullen. Anne McMullen is an education consultant based in Los Angeles. She works throughout the United States and internationally as a public speaker, writer, and consultant. Her primary focus is leadership. She's the project director of COSIN Empowered Superintendents Program and the author of Life Lessons in Leadership. Thank you so much for being with us, Anne. And Leah, would you like to introduce our other?
I will. Nora Anton, Dr. Anton, full disclosure, classmate of mine. We did our PhDs together, and we still, years later, have an every week check-in with one other classmate of ours. And so I told her what today's topic was and invited Nora to join us. She's currently the regional director for South Dakota for equity in educational leadership. Did I say that right, Nora?
Leadership for educational equity. Yep.
There we go.
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yep.
So welcome.
Nice to be here.
So Nolan, the worry about gamifying education from some parents that I've heard has been like, okay, I'm already fighting education or the games constantly. Now you're telling me you're going to turn education into a game. What's your response?
What a game is often misunderstood. And first of all, we all want to be in a space that Makai Csikszentmihalyi called flow. And we as game designers work very, very hard to keep our players into flow, because fundamentally it's addictive. You are happy, time flies, you can sit down to play a game, you get in flow, and all of a sudden 2 hours later and you don't realize it. You lose yourself. How you do that, and that actually has been shown to open the doors of your brain to memory and understanding in some very, very powerful ways. So the idea of getting kids into flow, you need to have challenges that they are solving. Not too hard, not too easy, just right. And that keeps them engaged because they're constantly doing what they want. For example, I believe that if we could create a database that knew everything that a child or an adult knows, so that no new concept is not presented without the underlying information, that you'd be much better. Because think of, we know that education and learning is additive. Think of it as a brick wall. And if you're laying bricks, pretty simple. But if there's a gap in the underlying bricks, adding the bricks on top is really hard. You got to fill that in. Learning is a little bit that way. And there's also this idea of spaced repetition learning, where if you can refresh an idea, a concept, just before you forget it, it's better. I like to use the example of remembering names at a cocktail party. You meet somebody, they give you their name. Can I remember it? maybe for 10 minutes. But if I go to them at the end of the party and get their name again, refresh it, I've maybe got it for the next morning, until the next morning. And if I review the business cards that I got the next morning, I've maybe got it for 3 weeks. And so spaced repetition gets it. And if we were to do it the right way and at the right sequence, I believe that we could have kids remember everything they learned in high school for the rest of their lives.
Wow, because I remember
doing the right
nothing
thing.
that I learned in high school.
Yeah.
Right?
But I think that so that's a principle that is really important that you can really do in computer learning that is very, very hard to do in a classroom. And then there's this whole idea of score. And unfortunately, in the classroom, score is comparative, which I think is a bad thing. I believe that you should always be bettering yourself, not in relationship to your peers. And that's why I believe that we'll have the right school system when we have no grades and no grades. Meaning, I believe that when you say I'm in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, what you're really doing is saying, hey, I'm batch processing these kids. And some kids are going to be old for their age, and some are going to be young for their age, some are going to be fast for their age. And so I say, if you've got a class of 30 kids and you've got them batched, one is being taught at speed, the other half are lost, and the other half are bored. And that if you can get rid of grades that way and have everybody compete with themselves, you're in a better spot.
Just to clarify, you're talking about grade levels, not the scores or markings?
Or both.
Or both?
Both. I'm
Okay.
talking both. Started out with grades, that is the grade level. Now let's talk about scores, A, B, C, D, what have you. I actually believe that's wrong too. Because what you should do is get mastery. And that everybody gets A or everybody gets Fs. And you keep playing and you keep learning until everybody gets an A. Because what happens in algebra is that algebra is when the wheels come off of people who got C's in long division, in multiplication, in fractions, in decimals. And all of a sudden, they're totally lost because they didn't have the foundations properly inset. And so the more we can go to this thing of mastery, spaced repetition, we're much better. Again, this is something that we can do through gamification of education. So those are my big ideas.
Can I just acknowledge the dog in the room? I adopted a dog recently. That's who's barking her approval to our conversation. So did I notice, Anne, were you wanting to say something?
Well, first of all, I'm just thrilled to know that Charlie is in the room. We've been waiting for the dog to join us for these sessions, so happy to have Charlie there. It is just a thrill to be here and to listen to this conversation. Though my name is Anne, I have sometimes been accused of being Pollyanna, so I'm going to give this to you straight right now. I do think, Leah, to your point earlier, that we have an incredible opportunity in education right now to not go back, but to move forward. And I, as you know, I work with a lot of superintendents across the U.S., and I have to tell you that many of them have embraced that concept that we're not going back to what was, we're going to move forward. I was thinking about the notion of gaming for learning, and games have been involved. You know, I was, you all know, I was a history teacher for 18 years and used a lot of gaming in my classroom then. I think and role playing, a lot of that, you know, for people to act out different characters in creating the Constitution and so forth. The other day I walked out of my house, and I have a next door neighbor who has 2 children, a young boy about 10 and a girl around 6. And down the sidewalk of our street, covering about 5 or 6 houses, is what looks like hopscotch. But it's math that they're going down up to 300 at the end, because they're working out. Now, I couldn't do all. I asked their dad, "Did you get all the way?" No, I didn't, but the kids got all the way down. So, when you think back, there have been times when we have used games to learn. I used to use a Jeopardy kind of game in my class, for kids to learn. So it wasn't always digital. But Nolan, I have to tell you, I have a son who's in the gaming business and was working with early on Microsoft's Age of Mythology, Age of Empires, and all of that whole series. And that was about learning different historical contexts within a game situation.
That's the one I was trying to think of. Thank you.
Okay, we need to talk sometime. But, and Dijanna, your point about Minecraft. Minecraft is a wonderfully creative game and a way to learn a lot of things. So I've done a lot of panel conversations around the issue of screen time. And I often say to people, when I was growing up, there was a concern about screen time, but it was that box in the living room. And, how long were we spending watching that television set? What were we watching? And I think some of the same thing applies here. It's not the screen, it's what are you doing when you're on there, And we talk a lot in education about the 4 C's: communication, collaboration, creativity, computational thinking. You can do all those things digitally. And people who didn't know that before know it now because that's the way we're doing it, So do we have to get better at it? Absolutely. Do we have to really think it through and how it works? Yes. Do we need to recognize kids as individuals? And to Nolan's point, right. Our system came out of the first industrial revolution where we learned how to manufacture by moving things around down an assembly line. And that's what we did with kids. We put them in a kindergarten box, a first grade box, a second grade box, and they moved through that way. There's a lot of conversation, another C, around competency-based education, where you prove you're competent and you moved on. And I think that's the point that Nolan's talking about. But systems are tough to change sometimes. And there's a political aspect that goes into public education as well. But there are a lot of leaders who are really doing phenomenal things. One of them here in Southern California at the Cajon Valley School District has this whole program, to Nolan's point, around world of work, where students as young as 2nd and 3rd grade are going out and experiencing different types of work environments because they've never seen them before. So I think the key word that I've always honed in on in education is relevance. It's got to be relevant to the kids and to their lives.
And what is more relevant to kids in this age than the games? And if we can meet them where they are, if we can give them options that they're already interested in, then I really think we have something.
One of the things that I wanted to just quickly contribute to the conversation as the educator in the room, so I'm also a classroom teacher. Like you said, Anne, we play a lot of games in the classroom, but now many educators are finding themselves quickly having to transfer all of their curriculum planning to a digital platform. And so we're looking for resources to help us create that gamified learning experience that we kind of just figured out in the classroom over the last 10 years, and how to translate that into the digital space. So I wanted to throw this out for our panel and for you, Nolan. What type of tools do you think teachers that are on board, let's do this, project-based, passion-based, relevant, what type of tools do you think are going to be invented, resources, now that we find ourselves using digital platforms as a primary platform for learning and education?
Big question, but let me tell you what I'm working on. And Leah has agreed to be on my board. But I'm actually spinning up a digital education company right now. I had one a couple of years ago called Brain Rush and could not get engagement. And so all of a sudden it looks like we can. So we're going to respin that. And we had 4 primary templates. One is sort of a glorified flashcard system in which you were learning flashcards, but with spaced repetition, that sort of thing. We had one called buckets, where you were choosing items based on characteristics. We called it the adjective or the adverb thing. We had one that was called sequences, where the order of things was important. And we had one which was kind of like a identifying parts of pictures, whether it be the human anatomy, pointing out the bones, pointing out the muscles, or the geography, states or countries or what have you. And we had 4 other things that we were working on, but the templates were done in such a way that teachers could use those to insert their own curriculum. And in many cases, the teachers would use their students to insert. And, you know, if you want to learn something, try to teach it. And they found that very, very effective. I have one that I want to try. You know, this is going to, you guys that actually know what you're doing probably laugh at it. But I wanted to do a composition plan. And the idea was that I believe that kids, if you break things down and make them do it quickly, that's kind of a game concept, that it could be great. And so imagine that I show a quick picture of a red ball under a table. And the student has to say, there's a red ball under the table, and type it as fast as they can. And then there's a red ball on top of the table, red ball on top of the table. And then there's a red ball and a green type ball. And so what they're doing, they're starting out descriptive. And then we get into compound complex sentences and more descriptive. And, you know, and if you want them to say it's a red bouncy ball, if they just say it's a red ball, you know, need more things. So I believe that we could get kids, you know, staring at a blank piece of paper is really hard for young kids, you know, and if we can give them things where we force them to act quickly and fast and over again, that's a game, even though they're learning how to compose. And then we can get more complex, because we know that with reading that a lot of times wheels come off at 3rd or 4th grade when they can actually read the words, but their understanding is lacking. And then the question is, why? Is it lacking because they don't know their vocabulary is lacking, they don't know the words, or they don't have life skills, life experiences, so they can relate to what's being told? I believe that we can tackle that in gamification, but it's going to take some work, and that's kind of one of the things I'd like to play with sometime.
I think it's a great start. And so Nora, I wanted to ask you, so Nora taught on the reservation in South Dakota before this job. How are the schools there handling the shutdown, and do kids have tablets or access? Is the internet available on all homes?
You know, great question, and thanks everyone. I'm enjoying learning and listening from you all. You know, access is a big issue in many different parts of the country, and certainly Native and Indigenous homelands are no exception to that. So, and if it's not access, it's the devices. So I know a family to the west of me who the mother is a non-traditional student attending a tribal college. So she shares Wi-Fi access with 5 of her children, one of whom is home from college, so he's finishing up online. And then the remaining children all have, you know, work to get done online. So there are challenges like that all across the country. And of course, I am most familiar with, our area here. And a kind of a question I had, everyone's kind of mentioned it in some fashion, but I wonder too, regarding relevance, access, this issue of equity. And, from being a parent, spending some amount of resources in rewarding, our children with good grades and, paying for games and that kind of thing. It seems like, the reality that some children, some families, just simply don't have access to the types of games that would further and enhance and really create an equitable future for them. And so I just wanted to throw that in the mix, for reaction, um, for strengthening our cause of education,
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
It's been a real concern since the shutdown because that's not an unusual story. 5 children, 1 device, and everybody in the home working. And I don't have an answer to that. Nolan, I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I do. What I believe that the thing that this company that I'm working on right now has these lessons. They're 10, 15 minutes. You cannot complete the lesson unless you have 100% mastery. We're going to create a crypto token that unlocks when you achieve that lesson. And that token is going to be worth somewhere between 25 and 35 cents in fiat money. Or if you spend it in our prize center, it's going to have about 50 cents worth of wholesale value. And so I want to pay kids to learn. And I think that I can sell these tokens to Standard Oil and to Nike and to Starbucks and what have you, and maybe do some things that give us a real ability to enable kids who, I just want them to not have to deal with drugs in order to buy a pair of Nikes when they're 10 years old.
Right.
And I think that if they can learn with money, if they don't have a Chromebook or a tablet, I mean, you can get a Android tablet right now for $80. It's pretty damn good. And a Chromebook for 120 is pretty damn good. And so I think that we can get into the environment where if a kid says, okay, I'm going to commit to earning $100 worth of tokens and you can have half of it to pay for my Chromebook over the next year and a half, or something like that.
Right.
And I actually think that's a good.
I saw Dijanna's comments while you were talking, and she said, my head just exploded.
Oh my goodness.
We're excited.
That's talking about disrupting education for innovation. I want to pay kids to learn so that they can, and it meets the equity issue, the learning piece. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that statement in a meaningful way and package it in a way that could really lead to transformational change in education. And how do we all get around that? Like, how do we back that up and help make that happen as educators? How do we translate that to the education world, that system, Anne, that was built hundreds of years ago? Let's change it so that we can reach everybody and have these kids take ownership of their education in a meaningful way.
And I hate to be the one to say this, but our half hour is up. This has gone so fast and it's been such a great conversation. Nolan, thank you so much for joining us.
Wow.
My pleasure. I sure hope I'm not too disruptive. People often say that I'm way out of the.
You're disruptive in all the awesome ways.
We
You
like it.
Yes.
absolutely need disruptors in education. So
We
thank
do.
you.
Thank you for showing up in education like that. Well, as Dr. Leah said, looks like we're out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists for coming and joining the conversation, and a huge thank you to Nolan. Wow, thank you for sharing your wisdom, enthusiasm, and just blowing our mind with transformational change. I'm Dr. Dijanna, and I'm here with Dr. Leah. Thank you so much for joining us for another live episode of Teachers for Teachers. That's you, moms and dads. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh.